flew into to the States just yesterday and is going back to Ireland on Tuesday. So this is a quick stop, but very fortunate to have him with us today. So without any further ado, please welcome Senator David Cullinane.
A Carja, Fáilte Óg go léir, tá mé anasásta a bheith an seo inniu. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very proud to be here on an occasion such as this. I was 6 years old when Bobby Sands was on hunger strike, and when all of those young men were on hunger strike and were engaged in that struggle that they were involved in at that time in the prisons in Ireland, both in terms of the H block in the north, the H block prison, and also the Armagh prison. There was women prisoners who were housed in the Armagh prison, and we reflect on their sacrifice as well, because they were also involved in the overall prison protest at that time. And it's fantastic as a young person from Ireland to drive into Hartford and to see a monument such as this, to remember a brave Irishman like Bobby Sands, and of course all of the hunger strikers who died, and also people like Michael Gahan as well, and Frank Stagg. And we're here essentially today to remember each and every one of those individuals, to remember their sacrifices, to commemorate the fact that these people were engaged in struggle, to remember why they were engaged in struggle. And I will reflect somewhat on the hunger strikes and what motivated those young men at that time. It's also important on events like this to remind ourselves of the long history and the long struggle for democracy and for justice and for equality and for freedom and for independence in Ireland. And Bobby Sands was one of a long generation of Irish people who were engaged in a just struggle, a just demand for the independence of Ireland. And it makes sense when the previous speaker spoke about the partition of Ireland. A partition of any country does not make sense. When you have division, it's going to lead to conflict. And when you have a situation where people are treated as second-class citizens, which Irish citizens were in the north of Ireland, that's going to lead to conflict. And for a long number of generations, we've had Irish people who are engaged in physical force, who are engaged in armed struggle, and also engaged in peaceful protests to try and raise awareness about what was happening in Ireland. And we're always very proud of the connection between Ireland and this country as well, and the fact that many people in this country were part of supporting all of those generations of Irish people. Bobby Sands himself was an ordinary person. There were ordinary men, there were young men, and there were ordinary women that were in the Armagh prisons. I know many people here would have met family members of those people who died on hunger strike. And they were all ordinary families, people like ourselves. But they found themselves in extraordinary circumstances, as many generations of Irish people did. And Bobby Sands was not just somebody who was an IRA prisoner, who happened to be the OC of the officer commanding of the prisoners in Long Kesh at that time. He was also a human being. He had a family. He was a poet. He was a thinker. He was a writer. And he was also a keen historian. So Bobby Sands understood his history. And he understood the true vision of what those who believe in justice and equality and the freedom of Ireland were about and where they came from. And I suppose the birth of all of that came in 1798, when we had the United Irishmen at that time who talked about Protestant, Catholic and dissenter. They wanted to see a united Ireland. They wanted to see all the people who live on the island of Ireland working together in the interest of all of the people who live on the island of Ireland. And they, I suppose, set out a vision, and they lit a torch for Irish people. And the flame of that torch has burned in the hearts of Irish people at home and abroad ever since. People who have that burning desire for independence and for justice and equality in Ireland. And the United Irishmen were followed, of course, by generations of other people, where the torch was handed over to every generation that followed the United Irishmen. We had the Young Irelanders of 1848, and from my own city of Waterford, we had Thomas Francis Maher, who people might know was a brigadier general in the US Army, and who was somebody who was sent away from Ireland to Tasmania, ended up, because of his part in the Young Ireland Rebellion at that time, ended up in Newfoundland, eventually ended up in this great country, and became a general in the US Army, and was the governor of Montana. And there are many stories like that. And following the Young Ireland Rebellion, of course, we had the 1916 Rising, where again the men and women of Dublin and Ireland came together and struggled and fought against what was the occupation of the south of Ireland at that time, and of course the island of Ireland. And following that rebellion, we had an election in Ireland in 1918, where the Sinn Fein party won an overall majority. And that majority was cast aside and set aside by the British government at that time. And that set the seeds for conflict. Because again, in any country where the will of the people is suppressed by an occupation force, by an occupation country, that's going to lead to resistance, and it did. And we had, of course, the War of Independence that was followed by the Civil War, that was followed, of course, then by the border campaign in the 1950s. And then that's where Bobby Sands ended up. Bobby Sands was part of that continuation of that long struggle. And Bobby Sands was the OC, as I said, the officer commanding of all of those prisoners, Irish Republican Army prisoners, who were in the H block at that time. And the British government developed a strategy, and they were always looking for ways to defeat the Republican struggle, to extinguish the flame that had been set alight by the United Irishmen, and that burns in the hearts, and has burned in the hearts of so many Irish people. And they decided that they were going to break the Republican struggle. They were going to break that spirit. They were going to drive away and drive down that desire for Irish freedom and for Irish unity and for independence by taking on the Republican prisoners, those prisoners who were in the H blocks at that time. And Margaret Thatcher's government developed what she called the criminalisation strategy. That they felt that if they broke the prisoners, the people who were in the prisons, if they broke the prisoners themselves, the Republican prisoners, then they would break the struggle. And they attempted to criminalise them. And Bobby Sands knew that if he let that happen, and his comrades let that happen, then all of the people who went before him, the United Irishmen, the Young Irelanders, the men and women of 1916, the border campaign, and of course all of his friends in the IRA at that time who were actively involved in armed struggle at that time, would also be branded as criminals. So Bobby Sands was not going to allow Margaret Thatcher or any British government criminalise what was a just demand for the independence of Ireland. And that was the stakes that young man was up against. He had the weight of that responsibility on his shoulders at that time. And he and his comrades in the H blocks at the time were just not going to let that happen. And they fought back. And they fought back with the only weapon they had in the prison at that time, which was their body and their lives. And they stood together and they went on a hunger strike. And in my view, what they did is they turned the tables on the British government. Because what they did is they ended up criminalising Margaret Thatcher's government. And they ended up criminalising the British presence in Ireland. And many people across Ireland and across the world could see the intransigence of the British government at the time, and could see that Bobby Sands was an ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances who was faced with the battle and the confrontation that he was faced with. And shortly after the hunger strike, when 10 men had died, and I suppose the root of it at the time, the root of the British government's criminalisation strategy was to remove political status, that they were no longer political prisoners, that they were simply criminals. That was the sense of where the British government wanted this to go. And they stripped away the rights that the prisoners had as political prisoners by the freedom of association to be stripped away, and the right to wear their own uniforms, and they tried to force them to wear a prison uniform and to present them as people who were involved in a criminal conspiracy and not a just conflict. And they, as I said, turned that against the British government and succeeded in their struggle, although unfortunately 10 men died in the H blocks. And shortly after the 10 men died, the political status was returned again to the prisoners in the H block. But what turned the corner, what turned the battle, was the support that Bobby Sands had from people all over the world. And I was talking just to some of the people here who were talking about the weekly vigils and protests that used to take place here in this city as well. That did have a big impact. It had a big impact on Bobby Sands, of course, and all of those hunger strikers. It had a big impact on people back in Ireland, and it especially had a big impact on the British government, because they knew that Bobby Sands had popular support. And Bobby Sands he didn't just have popular support here in this country. Bobby Sands was elected as an MP. There was a by-election that took place when Bobby Sands was on hunger strike, and he was put up for election in the Fermanagh South Tyrone constituency, and the people of that constituency voted for Bobby Sands as their MP, and that drove a stake right through the heart of the British government strategy at that time. No longer could they say, was Bobby Sands a criminal? He was someone who was supported by the people of Fermanagh South Tyrone, and by extension of that, I think the people of Ireland and people who believe in democracy and freedom outside of Ireland as well. We're also very proud and very thankful, and I just want to take the opportunity today to thank all of those people in this great country who are part of the long struggle for the freedom of Ireland. Because if you go back to any stage in the history of the conflict in Ireland over generations, Irish Americans were always to the fore. From the Fenians to the United Irishmen to 1916, right up to the present day, there was always people in this country who stood behind those brave men and women in Ireland, like Bobby Sands and his comrades, who were involved in that just demand for the struggle for the independence of Ireland. And thankfully today we have a peace process, and we have an agreement that was reached, the Good Friday Agreement, all those years ago. And the Good Friday Agreement is a stepping stone to a united Ireland. And it did create power-sharing institutions in the north of Ireland, which brings about parity of esteem and equality between the different traditions in the north of Ireland. And it does present a template and an opportunity for Republicans and for nationalists and for people in this country who also believe in a united Ireland to help drive that process forward. And the previous speaker is right that the objective of a united Ireland is not over. We can't be complacent because we have a peace process and believe that it's all over. As long as Ireland is partitioned, as long as we don't have a united Ireland, we need to keep moving forward, and we need to keep pressing forward. And I want to finish today by first of all thanking all of those people who are part of hundreds of resolutions and motions which have been passed in state senates and in local authorities and municipal authorities right across the United States in favour of a united Ireland. We need to keep seeing that and see more of that, because it's great for us back in Ireland to be able to say that people in America do support democracy and independence and a united Ireland, and we need to see more of it. We're also, as you know, we're pushing for a border poll in Ireland, where we're asking the British government to implement the Good Friday Agreement, because the Good Friday Agreement provides for the holding of a border poll where the people of Ireland can decide for themselves their future. And that was always at the heart of the struggle for democracy in Ireland and for independence in Ireland, that self-determination. The people of Ireland should be able to determine their own fate. That's what it's about. And we're calling for that border poll. We want people north and south to be able to have their say. And who's afraid of democracy? Nobody can be afraid of the ballot box. Nobody can be afraid of democracy. And we're simply calling for, again, a just demand for that border poll to take place. And again, it's going to be a role for people in this great country to be part of that campaign as well, and I would ask people to do that. I want to finish by quoting two chapters from a poem that Bobby Sands wrote, because to me it best sums up what Bobby Sands stood for. And it goes something like this: "It is found in every light of hope, it knows no bounds nor space, it has risen and red and black and white, it is there in every race. It lies in the hearts of our heroes dead, it screams in tyrants' eyes. It had reached the peaks of mountains high as it comes searing across the skies. It lights the dark of my prison cell, it thunders forth with might. It is the undauntable thought, my friend, that thought that says I'm right." Bobby Sands was right. All of those people who support democracy and independence in Ireland are right. We'll continue that battle and we will achieve a united Ireland. Nice job.